Hi, everybody. This is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio. Thanks for giving us the time again. We've got an incredibly good guest today, as always, and I want to tell you how we ended up with this particular guest. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching a show that, of course, I can't mention if we want to stay on the air, and we had a great speech by a registered nurse in Connecticut talking about the pandemic situation and what was really going on. And it wasn't that the information was surprising, because we're well aware of the whole situation, how it fits into the world developments, and a lot of depth and detail. But what was surprising is that anybody within the system would dare to say it. And that needs to spread. And I thought, wow, this is great. I saved the file, called it Brave Nurse, and so that I could easily find it again. And it was about what's really going on with the pandemic and some of the details, like the treatments and the masks and the death rate figures and all that stuff. But on a larger scale, it was also about what's going on in the country, in America, and much of the rest of the world right now, how much it's degenerated from when the founders of America put the first principles together for a country based on individual freedom, which really could be how every country is. And the founders mentioned that the rights that are unalienable and are given by God, not by the government or the UN or anybody else, are the same in every country. It's just that they're not recognized in most of the world. And the idea was that by recognizing them in America, that idea could not only be demonstrated, but copied. And it's still possible. It's just we've come pretty far from that. And the rulers have calculated that we're too far gone to turn it around at this point. And I don't think that's necessarily true. So the man that was the nurse in that video was Josiah Dan, who lives in Connecticut, as far as I know. And I thought, well, maybe he would be willing to come on the show and talk about it in a little bit more depth, and about that speech and the one he just gave last weekend. And fortunately for us, he said, sure, and we're going to do that for a little while right now. So welcome, Josiah, and thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. We'll have a fun
Thank you for
time.
having me.
So, you know, what I'd like to do is, as usual in these shows, is pick up the attention of the people who have no idea what we're talking about. So they know from my introduction that you're a registered nurse, but how did you get into that, and how did you even get into the mentality where you were able to question authority and the narrative that we're all supposed to believe? Because that's getting to be a rare quality now.
All right. So the way I got into nursing, I actually was, I'd gone to school already. I had a bachelor's degree in history from a university in Connecticut. And after I finished that degree, I had a bachelor's in history with a minor in physical education. And I had already determined by the time that I was actually a junior in that degree process that I probably wasn't going to teach, which was kind of what I was considering at the time, given the two majors, the major and the minor that I had. And by the time that I came to that conclusion, I needed to figure out what I was going to do next. I've already, at that point in time, been working at a hospital for, goodness, at least 10 years. I started working at a hospital when I was 16 years old, worked myself from the ground up in housekeeping, doing general housekeeping and cleaning and refinishing floors, and, you know, in general, having access and contact with patients via doing that. Yeah. And then I was getting married. I was 25 years old, and I was like, well, I need to figure out a career path, not just a job. And I had tried to get into some industry work. I was doing applications, but it was the recession of 2007, 2008, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity by comparison to what there had been before. So I had looked at a couple different avenues. I was looking at doing the electrical union because I like working with my hands, or carpentry, but there was no work available, even though I had gotten through the process of getting into the union essentially by doing the classes and the test. So I decided, hey, you know, I work in a hospital, let's look into nursing. I knew a bunch of people that were nurses and that really enjoyed doing their job. I've always been good with people. I like helping. And so I started taking some prerequisites for that program, and kind of just took off. I really enjoyed doing my biology stuff and my A&P, and I did really well at it. I had a 4.0 to get into the program, which the program that I had applied to was based on academic credentialing. So essentially, if you're at the top of your class, you had pretty much like a 90% chance of getting in as long as you're competitive. Okay. And I did well and got in, and kind of that's actually where a lot of the questioning in healthcare started too. So,
yeah, because I'm sure that in your conventional training, it was leading you toward believing everything that the standard medical perspective is wanting you to believe. So why did you start questioning it at that point? What happened?
I think one of the bigger things that made me question things was just the constant pressure from the school and from the institutions that I participated in doing clinicals at, were mandating in my state that I had to have the flu shot to actually participate in the clinicals and to be able to do patient care through the school. Okay. And I had been working in healthcare for a long time. I had been, not necessarily pressured at my employment to get the flu shot, but probably more through my physician at the time. And for most of my working years, I didn't choose to get the flu shot. I got it a couple of times and subsequently didn't really feel well. Got a localized reaction, soreness in the arm, which is par for the course. When you get an injection, you may have that reaction, but I didn't actually feel well. Like I felt ill. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to be doing that again. And then started to question, like, well, if they're pushing this so much and I'm not feeling well, and I've talked to other people who also didn't feel well after they got the shot, I was like, well, I'm going to look into this and start investigating why this might happen or what are the potential detriments, because they don't really tell you that stuff when you get the flu shot. They just say, hey, get this so you can protect your patients, rather than this is an informed consent issue. Like when people advocate for you to have a particular intervention as a medical professional, you're taught that there's this thing called informed consent. They tell you the risks and the benefits of the situation, and then you make a calculated risk assessment and make a decision. Well, when they're essentially either mandating or strongly encouraging you to get a flu shot, that's not really a lot of the process. They just tell you basically, this protects your patients. Essentially, there's really minimal risk other than a localized skin reaction or musculoskeletal reaction where you get the injection, and kind of leave it at that. They don't go through much detail. So it doesn't, to me, seem like a very good informed consent situation.
Right. Right. It's supposed to be completely informed, right? Yep. It's not just a few selected things about it.
Yeah, and that's actually a kind of a common thing when you get injections that are, vaccinations. That most providers don't actually provide you with the packet insert that comes with the box. They give you a more like prepared piece that's usually a two-sided sheet that gives you general information on vaccinations and what localized reactions look like, and don't really spell out a whole lot of detail other than that. And if you ask for the packet insert, which is something that people don't really realize when you're being told by a physician or a healthcare practitioner that they're encouraging you or strongly encouraging you to get a vaccine, they don't actually give you the package insert. But if you ask for it as a informed individual, realizing that there are potential risks and benefits, they cannot refuse to give it to you. So if you ask for that package insert, it would behoove you to read it, because if you unfold that package insert, it's like unfolding a roadmap, and it's humongous.
You want to bring a really high quality magnifying glass with you if you want to do that, right?
That's correct. A good magnifying glass and a dictionary, because it's a lot of medical terms. But there's a couple of sections that are important for you to look at, because they do have to spell out the risks or potential reactions that can occur. And in that section, there's a lot of information, and they do give you some sort of breakdown as to the commonality of those types of reactions and what those reactions actually entail. So those are the sections you really want to kind of keen in on. And also, they have to provide you the information on what the chemical compounds are that are in the vaccine, because that's another piece that if you actually do a little bit of research on just the chemical compounds that are in the vaccine, you probably will walk away having a much different view on why either that you're going to do it or not, which most people, I think, when you read the vaccine compounds that are present, would probably choose not to. That's just kind of like a general feeling that I get based on what I do when I look at them. And then once you read those and actually read like the MSDS sheets, which is a material safety data sheet on those compounds itself, you're going to get a much different view on what the potential risks are.
And that the details on the individual chemical ingredients there is not necessarily in the package insert, right? I mean,
it'll give you
some of that you have to do.
Yeah, it'll give you the compound itself. So if it's like, for instance, and these ingredients can change from year to year, depending on how they're compounded in the vaccines. But there was a compound in the flu shot one year, and I think it was octaphenyl ethyl oxalate. I believe that was the compound. And if you read it, and you read how heavily restricted it is by the federal government, they can't like offload this chemical, which is an industrial chemical, into water supply because it has really, really bad effects on animal life. It actually causes either asexual characteristics to develop in animals and or the inversion characteristics to develop. So if you're a female frog, it will drive you to actually develop more male-like characteristics, or inverse. If you're a male frog, it will just, drive you to have more female characteristics.
They're not having any problem doing that with atrazine right now. So.
Yep. There's a lot of chemicals out there that are not regulated, and that's one of the detriments that we have in this country in particular, is that we don't regulate well the chemicals that we use in our environment, whether it's in pesticides or in medical care products, by comparison to Europe. Europe has a much more stringent mechanism by which they evaluate things. And there are particular countries that do much better at that. I believe the Netherlands is one of the better countries for evaluating chemical compounds and allowing them to actually hit the market.
Okay, but the one that you were looking at as a vaccine ingredient was regulated pretty strongly.
That one was, yeah. And that was kind of the thing that made me question when I was looking at that one, because I had already gone through the nursing program and was working at the time.
Right.
And my employer was strongly advocating, not to the point where they were mandating, but they were forcing anyone that refused the vaccine to go through essentially a re-education class. Kind of sounds familiar, right?
Yeah, fix your attitude, right?
And when I went through that class, I came prepared. I brought the actual package insert, and I had brought copies of the MSDS sheet, and the person that I was actually trying to re-educate me actually got an education on what those compounds are and how heavily regulated they are by the EPA, because that was actually the larger governing board at the time that was heavily regulating that compound. And I look at it and I say, well, this stuff is getting injected into me, and I want to be able to have kids someday, and I don't want something to detrimentally impact my ability to develop sperm that's effective. And we know that this does this in nature. So why would I not question what is being injected into me and actually either question it and or just say no? And, the response that I got from the person doing the re-education program was actually, well, I think we need to worry more about what's going on in our food system than we do in what's getting injected into us in vaccines. I said, I think it's the same issue.
Yeah. In fact, the vaccines get into you faster than, at least when you eat something, you've got stomach acid and your liver trying to detoxify it and things like that.
Yes. So. Yeah, and that brings up a really good point, is that vaccines actually bypass all your protective mechanisms in your body. So the means by which a practitioner or a medical institution vaccinates you, it doesn't go through the filtration processes that are natural to the body to weed out bad things. So if you eat something that's got bacteria in it, and say you eat something that's heavily laden with E. coli, well, it has to get through, like you said, your stomach acid, which naturally kind of takes care of a large burden of that bacteria. Right. And then whatever survives passes into the intestines, and that's what gives you the severe gastrointestinal problems if you have E. coli and you get an infection of E. coli, is that too much of it there was too heavy of a burden in whatever it was that you ate, that not all of it got killed by your stomach acid. So it then gets into your intestines and you get severe GI symptoms. And so that is actually the main protective mechanism of your body, is your GI system. But when you inject something into your system, you're putting it as it's called a depot, or it's a small volume that then gets dispersed through the intramuscular system. And what ends up happening is it gets slowly picked up by your blood supply as it absorbs into the muscular system. And that mechanism actually bypasses the protection that your intestines have, which are, you have circulating immune compounds in your intestines. You have acid, you have acid-base issues, you have other bacteria that are competing for space that are good bacteria. So you have all this stuff going on in your intestines that you don't have going on in your intramuscular system. And when they inject something that's heavily laden with aluminum, for instance, or mercury, or other compounds like polysorbate 80 or polysorbate 20, and then you have the actual vaccine antigens, or the antigens themselves. None of that actually gets filtered out effectively by comparison to what would happen if you ingested it. And so it's a direct application mechanism where it gets absorbed right into your muscles and then right into your blood supply. And in the case of the metal compounds that are like the aluminum and the mercury, that actually gets it's a mechanism that can be uptaked into your central nervous system, and that's actually a potential severe detriment.
Yeah, exactly. And to some extent that applies to anything you put on your skin as well, and people don't realize that. That's why birth control patches work, and nicotine patches and things like that. It goes right into your blood. And
buccal stuff too. I mean, so if you put things in your mouth and suck on them, it's actually a very good way to actually get absorption. So for me, like, I use CBD, and that's actually the best way to uptake a CBD, other than eating it, because it doesn't get broken down in your stomach acid when it gets absorbed through your buccal membranes.
Right, like under your tongue or something like that.
Yeah, or in your cheek or wherever. You swish it around your mouth for a while, for a couple minutes, and it absorbs.
So how did that attitude of questioning things I mean, you said you weren't going to teach, but you're teaching, so it's just a different form. So how did that attitude lead to your reaction to the pandemic situation?
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, I actually learned a lot about research, not necessarily from my nursing program itself, because my program wasn't really research driven per se. I did an associate's program to become a nurse. So I had a bachelor's degree, and I needed to get to an RN. And so I looked at a program that I was going to be best for me for time, because I was getting married. So I did an associate's program that was a lot of direct application. So I did the book work, and then we did the preclinical stuff in the lab. And then we did a lot of clinical time. So right semester one, it was a 4-semester program. In semester one of the nursing program, you got right in and were taking care of patients, and the same thing all the way through. So it was a lot of clinical time, by comparison to going through a bachelor's program where you spend your first 2 years just doing a lot of like general eds and all that kind of stuff. And so when I was a history major, I had to actually focus on doing primary source documentation to do my research, and evaluating tertiary sources, secondary sources, and primary sources. And so that served me really well in looking at medical literature, because when you're looking at primary source documentation, kind of like the best thing that you're looking at is, well, what are these peer-reviewed studies say by comparison to, say an article that you're reading? Because an article may cite from the peer-reviewed source, but if you read the peer-reviewed source itself, you're going to get a different load of information or a different scope of information than may have been put into an article. And so that's kind of how I've gotten to where I've come to thus far with understanding vaccines and other medical issues that are important to me. Because a lot of my drive now, even though I work as you call it a mainstream nurse, I love natural health, and I love learning about how the body functions and what works best with the body. And I think it's really cool that there's a lot of natural compounds out there that there's really good peer-reviewed sourcing on. So recently, in the process of learning about COVID and this new infection of SARS, I came across really neat documentation on like cordyceps, which is a mushroom that's from China that has amazing properties for the body that have been researched and documented in peer-reviewed literature. And, cordyceps and mushrooms actually may be a really good avenue of approach for tackling some of these issues that we're dealing with COVID, because of how it actually benefits the body by allowing your red blood cells to uptake more oxygen, actually has immune boosting effects. It's really, really cool stuff. So essentially, learning how to look at primary source documentation or peer-reviewed articles is what has kind of driven me to look where I look, as well as being able to listen to other people talk about things that have more education than myself. I mean, I'm a nurse. I have 2 degrees, and I read a lot. And there's other people that are physicians that hold similar views to myself, PhDs. I've heard testimony from immunologists that actually come to the same conclusions as what I'm talking about right now. I think Tatiana Obukainich is a immunologist who opposes mandatory vaccines because there are severe concerns regarding the use of them. And actually, if you look at both peer-reviewed data as well as the historical data that has actually happened around vaccine campaigns historically, both here and over in Europe, there's been some severe misinformation issues that have occurred with dispensing the truth to the public.
Right. So what was it about what you experienced with the pandemic work inside the hospital that led you to giving the talk that I first heard a couple of weeks ago? What was that about?
So the whole mandatory masking thing made me kind of like I said in one of the interviews that I gave before, like when all this stuff rolled out, yeah, sure, everybody was really, really hyper cautious. We wanted to be very conservative because we wanted to make sure both we as healthcare workers and providers were able to take care of ourselves, because you can't take care of a patient really well if you're sick or getting sick with something that may be really communicable or heavily, easily communicable. So we wanted to make sure that we were taken care of by having the right PPE, and our healthcare practice was a good healthcare practice. And then also making sure that we're protecting our patients by doing the things that are necessary to protect ourselves. Because if you get infected and then you transfer that infection to somebody else, that's not really all that good. Right. So looking at our use of PPE, the issues around PPE in general, because at the time, we had supply chain problems, and we're told by the CDC that we need to do our best to conserve PPE because we can't get shipments of it from overseas because it's being produced in China. So we have to start reusing all this stuff. And I'm like, well, this really doesn't make much sense.
And just so that everybody follows you, PPE is personal protective equipment, right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That medical lingo.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
So yeah, in looking at that and kind of evaluating what we had to do, like I can't tell my employer that I'm going to use everything single use when they're telling me to conserve, even if I think it's the best practice, because they're the ones that actually are buying the product. So I had to do my best to try and work within that framework. But it's something that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me when you look at how infections occur. And if you read into, information from that I quoted from Anthony Fauci, and the Surgeon General having conversations or dispensing information to the public about the use of these devices like masks or gloves, etc. And that if you're using these things throughout a 24-hour period, or even say for a couple of hours while you're out and about, say you have gloves on and a mask, well, if you're constantly pulling the mask down and it's not over your nose, well, you're not really doing yourself any good, because it's just covering your mouth, and you're touching the mask with dirty hands. Even though you have gloves on, you've been touching all these surfaces. So using PPE in a medical environment is very different than using PPE out and about in society. The purpose is very different. You put gloves on single use to do patient care because you want to protect yourself from bloodborne pathogens and from severe bacterial infections like MRSA or VRE, which are communicable to one another, and they're difficult to treat with antibiotics. So that's methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus or vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus or Enterococcus. Sorry, and so those are common ones that we come in contact with in the hospital. And so you wear gloves in those instances because they're contact precautions. You get exposed to them and can contract them by physical contact. So you put the gloves on, and then when you're done with the gloves, you take them off and you wash your hands, and then you go on to do whatever else you have to do, either with another patient or go to charting or whatever. You don't wear those gloves between patient rooms. You don't wear your mask and gown between patient rooms.
Right.
And those are some of the things that, became a challenge with this whole, COVID-19 issue, is that because of the conservation issue and the supply chain problems, what do you do when you have single-use items that you have a limited supply of? And one of the means by which you do that is you do as much as you can with the patient in the room all at once, rather than having to go in and out and waste PPE. Because in a normal environment, it's not such a big deal, because you don't have all these patients that are concerned for contact precautions. And in this case, it would be droplets. So it is transmitted by sneezing, coughing, expectoration of fluids. So if someone, is hacking or retching, that kind of thing, or airborne, which are actually viruses typically that can be communicable in the air itself. So when someone sneezes and something becomes airborne, or coughs and it becomes airborne, those droplets actually break down into finer particles, and those viral particles are essentially now free floating in the environment, and that's another vector of transmission. Right. And so when you're using PPE in those environments, they're meant to be single use, and they're meant to be not reused. So you actually exit the environment, you take off the garb either just outside of the environment that you were just in and dispose of it properly, and then kind of go back to your regular work environment, which would be like the nursing station or another patient room that doesn't have those particular concerns of airborne precautions or contact and or droplet. And so in that, looking at the issues that we're developing, I'm like, wow, there's a real change in our healthcare practice, because now we have this issue of conservation and lack of supply. And how is this going to affect me? And how is this going to affect my patients? Because now I actually am using equipment that can be now acting as a vector for transition to myself, because I have to wear a mask all day long. And I'm not supposed to be swapping that mask out willy-nilly, because we don't have a large supply of it. And so I'm realizing, like, when I go to the desk, if I have to like pull the mask down and, blow my nose, or, go grab a drink of water or something like that, I'm actually constantly touching this thing that I have to, be considering the fact that there's now embedded viral particles in the mask itself. So those are some of the things that made me question our healthcare practice. And then things that made me question just the whole narrative in general is looking at peer-reviewed data sourcing, because even though this is a new virus that we don't have a lot of exposure with, there were articles that were published in like the New England Journal of Medicine. It was a editorial that was produced by, in part, Anthony Fauci. And, at the beginning of all this, he actually was saying that, we're not going to really have to deal with this virus very much. We're probably looking at less than like a 1% fatality rate. And it was not, I think it was within a week or two of him actually having that article published, that he's out there on a podium telling the entirety of the United States we're going to have millions and millions of people dying from this thing, and kind of blowing it up on the other side, saying to one group of people that are reading like the peer-reviewed sourcing, this isn't going to be that bad. And then the other people that are the general public telling them, this is something you need to, worry about, because we're all going to die. Well, those don't really square with me. So I was trying to evaluate, what does this say? And what does that say? And they're coming from the same person. And why are we getting such a disparity in the numbers and the predictive value of what they're saying, even though it's the same person talking? So that was one piece. There's a couple of other articles that I had pulled up as well and posted on my Facebook page. I don't remember what journal it was in, but it was actually evaluating the prospective death rates based on the initial numbers that we were getting out of China. And even that didn't square with what we're being told here in the United States. So it's very challenging when you're looking at something from a statistical standpoint of what are we seeing elsewhere, and what does that mean for our particular society, because that's China or America, and how do we evaluate this? And it didn't seem like the evaluation that we were getting from the podium and from the media is actually squaring with reality, and especially with what I was seeing in the hospital. I mean, we were expecting to have massive volumes of patients with, all of these symptoms coming to us that needed to be treated in the ER. and then, subsequently, in medical surgical or the ICU, depending on what their needs were, and or being shipped out to other facilities. And granted, we did have an influx initially, and personally, I think it was more because people had a lot of fear about what was coming this way.
Right.
And so they were very concerned about contracting this virus. And so they were told that, like fever, cough, and shortness of breath were common symptoms. And so like everybody was coming out of the woodwork to be seen because they were concerned because they had a cough that they might have this. And after that, our volume is drastically decreased, and they stayed decreased for, right around 2 months-ish. I mean, our volume still haven't come up completely where I work. And so that has a severe detrimental impact on our facility because we're now forced to shut down, same-day surgery, regular surgery, anything but an emergency surgery is forced to shut down. And our tertiary, our primary care services are limited because of all this. And our surgical availability is also limited via like outpatient stuff. So people that have surgical issues that need to consult, unless it's a real severe emergency that you need to like consider having surgery for right away, these people aren't being seen either. So it was an economic effect on our facility, as well as a like overall questioning of like, why are we not seeing the volume of patients that they're saying that we're supposed to see?
Right. So what in all of that made you feel like you had to go out and give a public talk and, kind of risk people thinking that you were going crazy? Or what was it that was so important to get to everybody?
I'm a free thinker, and I'm also a liberty-loving individual. Like as someone who studied history and grew up in this country, I value my freedom, and I value the history of my people. And the history of my people tells me that we left a country, as in the originators of this country, the Puritans and the Pilgrims, left Great Britain because of oppression. They were told essentially, if you don't participate in the Church of England, you can't have the sacraments, and you can't basically send your kids to school. So it's kind of a similar comparison here to like, if you don't get vaccinated, you can't send your kids to school. Right. And so I value my history, and I understand a good amount of my history. And what I'm seeing roll out as a byproduct of this coronavirus concern is a fear-driven and a hysteria-driven response from both the media and from our government that is restricting our liberties, our constitutionally protected rights, and is violating the Bill of Rights. And that makes me really concerned about the direction of our country. And so I went to an event that was the CT Liberty Rally event in Hartford, and heard some people speak, and I'm like, wow, I actually agree with those people. And I think I'll probably come back here because I want to support this, both like the liberty movement in my state of like, hey, guess what? I'm not just some peon sheep that you get to tell what to do. And also I want to support like the reopening of my state because our businesses are severely impacted here to their detriment, and potentially to the detriment of our overall economy in the state and the nation. And so
when are they saying your state will open at this point?
Our state has a 4-phase, sorry, I have mosquitoes here. There's a 4-phase plan that has been initiated by our Governor Ned Lamont. And that 4-phase plan essentially doesn't come to fruition until, I think, end of August, September, somewhere in that ballpark.
Wow.
And so each phase, I think, is about 4 weeks long. But it's also not like a set in stone 4-week per phase plan either. I mean, like, he's already, kept things from opening that he said we were going to open at a particular time. Yeah. And that was the rally that I spoke at. There was a group of salon and hairstylists and barbers that were told that they could be opening on the 20th. So many of them actually went out, spent a lot of money on their personal protective equipment, and spent a lot of money to upgrade their facilities to meet these new requirements that our governor was telling them they had to. And then after they spent all this money and this time to prepare for an opening, we're told, well, no.
When did you find out, and because I assume that you did, that the death statistics are being faked?
So I heard multiple things online from kind of scrolling around and listening to different physicians speak. So I heard the information from the doctors out of California. I think they were urgent care doctors. One of them's last name was Erickson. So I heard them speak, and they had, some severe questioning based on the data that was coming out of LA County and the Department of Public Health in LA, with one other major university that actually participated in a study to evaluate the exposure of people in LA to this new virus, and to demonstrate that they had like a serum response. So they have antibodies in their blood that demonstrate that they were exposed. And then they took that initial data that they got, which I think was around 8,000 people was the study. And then they extrapolated the data to the total number of people in LA County to get a rough number of how many people most likely had been exposed based on that initial study. And that's a very large number. I mean, granted, they had a big range. So it's 220 to 440,000, I think, people that they were estimating had been exposed and probably had a serum, could demonstrate serum positive for antibodies. Right. Even though the death toll in that area would not necessitate all these drastic interventions and restrictions that were being applied.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because those are getting tighter as the awareness of that the death rate is very low gets more widespread. So they're just figuring that it doesn't matter. We'll just keep going with it at this point.
Yeah, and I think that the general population of this country should question, my second speech really addressed this issue, is that if the point of this mandatory masking and the social distancing was to flatten the curve, well, we just did that. And why are you continuing with these restrictions? You're changing the rules of the game midway, but what you're telling us as a rationale doesn't really make sense. And what we're seeing is that the rationale keeps shifting. And this is coming not just from our governors and from our elected officials, but also from people like Anthony Fauci. I mean, he tells us on the one hand, at the beginning of all this, you don't need to wear masks. You should think, look at masks, and you should think healthcare practitioners or healthcare providers, they need to have the masks. You don't need to have them in general public. And now it's, everybody needs the mask. And now it's getting kind of flipped back the other way. So it's why does this keep shifting? If we're talking like science here, if we're talking about peer-reviewed data, we're talking about analysis of statistics, and we're talking about how disease functions, that we should have some pretty solid answers about how all this works. And yet what we're getting is a floating line that actually never stays still. And the sands beneath all of our decisions just keep shifting all over the place.
Did you see Dr. Blaylock's piece about why masks are a terrible idea and how they're really bad for people's health?
Oh, yeah. I cited from his research in my first speech. And if you... I got my copy of that through an organization called greenmedinfo.com, which is phenomenal. Yeah. And Sayer G, he's a cool guy, and he does a lot of research. And if you read through to the very bottom of Blaylock's piece, he actually has all the citations in his piece from these peer-reviewed source materials. And so this is stuff not just from the United States. This is stuff that's probably a little bit more advanced because it's coming out of China, who's been dealing with this for a little bit longer than we have. And granted, there's issues with us trusting all the data that's coming out of China, for sure, because, what all this is leading me to look at with what happened in China with the Wuhan lab and with the connections with Fauci and the investigation that now has to go on is that, the Chinese Communist Party has been messing with things that they shouldn't have been messing with. And this is probably a byproduct of tinkering with nature, at the very least.
Right, with the help of people who are allied with them from inside the U.S. medical system as well, right?
Yes.
Because it was all paid for by the U.S. government, NIH, and they give them money.
Yep. And, then that ultimately begs the question, why did our government, and technically our government didn't even make that decision. Anthony Fauci made that decision. He was told by our government that you're not supposed to be doing this gain of function research anymore, which gain of function is manipulating viruses to actually allow them to become more virulent and host driven. So a virus that's, a virus that's particular to a particular species, so say dogs or cats or whatever it is, they're messing with it to make it so that it actually can attack humans and giving it or assisting it to get genetic information that allows it to bind to our receptor sites better.
Yeah.
So that's what gain of function is.
That's not health research. That's something else.
Yeah, I mean, like, they couch it as health research because they're, quote unquote, researching to make vaccines for dangerous viruses.
Right, and they're assuming that you don't know the history of vaccines at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And that you believe.
Which the general public, I mean, the general public has a skewed view of the history of vaccines. So unless you're actually doing some digging, you're not going to come to the conclusions that are going to help you.
Well, funding that, doing that kind of research in the U.S. has been illegal since 1989. But apparently Fauci under Obama thought it was fine. And Obama could have stopped it, but he supported it. And then I think when Trump was getting in, they were worried that he might not be as enthusiastic. And so they... Actually,
the driving force between the change was at the end of Obama's presidency, I think it was just before the transition. I think it was 2015. There was a research lab down south. I believe it was in the Carolinas, and there was an outbreak as a byproduct of a leaked virus to the community around where that research facility was. And that is actually what gave gain-of-function studies a real bad press in the United States.
So they thought it would be a good time to move at that point.
Yeah. That was kind of what shut things down here for Anthony Fauci, because Obama couldn't ignore it. And so he had to say there's now a moratorium on this research here in the United States. Right. But Anthony Fauci still kept taking the same amount of money for the research in the U.S. and then just funneled it through NIAID, which is his organization that's a part of the NIH, over to the Wuhan lab to continue the research.
Yeah, because he cared about the people so much, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then, people have debated whether it was released on purpose or not, but it seems unlikely that it was a chance because it was basically announced beforehand and they had Event 201 and all those things.
Oh, yeah. When you look into that stuff, it's sketchy for sure. At the best, it's sketchy. At the worst, it's like severely concerning.
Yeah, that would be a nice way to say it.
Yeah.
So, and apparently it may not, depending on what they wanted to do, it may not have been that successful because it really hasn't killed enough people to avoid the necessity for faking the death rates and things like that. We've had doctors on the show that have said, CDC sent out memos that said, look, you should just call everybody COVID-19 deaths and it will never be reviewed, so don't worry about it. If you just have the hunch or anything, or no backup data or proof or testing or anything, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And there have been funny memes online that a skydiver whose parachute failed to open died of COVID-19 on the way down.
Yeah. Yep. An interesting one that I heard, I haven't done the research to actually verify this, so I'm literally just speaking about something that I heard. Yeah. It was a pastor doing a sermon from Georgia, I believe. And he was talking about all these events that are happening and kind of looking at them from a biblical perspective. And, with the books of Daniel and Revelation as a comparison. And he was talking about the CARES Act. And it's one of the things that he quoted was that the CARES Act was actually drafted before we even knew anything was happening in Wuhan.
Yeah.
So that's also another concerning thing. Like, if the CARES Act was drafted way before any of this outbreak occurred in Wuhan in China, and yet it was to do with what was happening in Wuhan.
Right.
That's another kind of avenue of like, well, Event 201, which happened in November, was a precursor and basically was almost an exact mimic of what we're watching happen in the world. And if the CARES Act was also drafted pretty far in advance for an event that hadn't happened yet to cover the costs of an event that hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Also a very concerning thing, that they're preparing all these funds for something that, like, this massive pandemic that didn't hit yet.
I mean, the multi-100-page Patriot Act was done before 9/11.
Yeah.
So
those are all concerning.
Yeah.
I mean, to look at the history, and like 9/11 is another interesting example because you look at the fall of the, World Trade Centers, and they talk about, like Building 1 and Building 2. Well, they don't really talk to you much about Building 7. And when you dig into the research, you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And the fact that there was a a military games event that actually was a mimic of everything that happened in 9/11 that happened shortly before as well. So you're like looking at these like psyop events that are like predicting things happening. It's really bizarre.
Well, so if the virus was intended to be a bioweapon, it really wasn't very successful. But if it was intended as an excuse for sudden increase in tyranny, it's been really successful.
Yeah, and the other way you could look at it too is, you know, maybe it was an intended thing and they were hoping for a better result, but at the very best, it was a good means by which to prepare the people for the future of this happening regularly. That's another way to look at it.
Exactly. The what is that? The so-called new normal, where you can never be normal again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have to vaccinate 7 billion people in order to give you a semi-normal and inject you with a dye that's going to identify you, right? You can't take it out like you can a microchip.
Yeah, that's all scary stuff, especially for me, particularly because I'm a Christian and I look at what happens in the book of Revelation as a predictive. Yeah. And I'm like, this pretty matches up almost exactly.
Well, it's all coincidence, like the patent 060606 and the bill for $100 billion for the contact tracers.
Yep.
Amazing coincidence that was bill 6666, right?
Yeah. Yeah. When you see that many coincidences happening, you got to question, is this a coincidence or not?
Right. So when did you find out what's planned with the contact tracing, and what do you think about that?
Well, I found out via articles that I read from different organizations. So I subscribe to an organization called TTAC, The Truth About Cancer, by Ty and Charlene Bollinger. They're out of, I believe, Tennessee or Kentucky. And they've worked on multiple documentary series over the past probably 8 or 10 years, somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah. And one of them was about cancer. That's actually kind of what got me involved in looking at them and their research that occurred in the United States, North America, Canada, Mexico, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then over in Europe. And that was because I had a family member that developed cancer. And I was like, I knew that chemo and radiation really aren't that good for the body, that it actually causes a lot of problems for the body, and that both of those things actually cause cancer. So when you use them as treatments, you know, you're an
interesting choice of therapies.
Yeah, you're trying to attack cancer with a cancer-causing agent. What do you think is going to happen in the long run? Probably cancer.
Right.
And so I got, you know, I was told about this documentary series by a coworker, and I started checking it out. I watched the first 2 episodes for free on YouTube. I'm like, wow, this is like mind-blowing, phenomenal stuff.
Yeah.
And so I bought the whole series, watched the whole series. I bought the expanded one, which was all the full-length interviews with all the physicians and all of the people that they interviewed that were from all over the world. And I watched all of that. And it's probably 170 hours of footage. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, this is phenomenal. Like, wow, there's so much out there that we're not told. And these are from, you know, either former or mainline practitioners, you know, in the United States and elsewhere, that are using alternative modalities to really good effect in having their information suppressed. And so, anyways, they also did a vaccine series called The Truth About Vaccines, which they released, I think, in 2017, and they just released it again in 2020. And it's an expanded one that actually talks specifically about what's going on now with the contact tracing bill and with COVID-19, and then reading articles by like Green Med Info. There's multiple other alternative health practitioners that I get periodicals from via the email. And reading a lot of the stuff that I'm getting there, I'm like, wow, man, this is craziness. Like HR 6666 is like, dude, why? How does this make any sense?
Yeah, and you can hire quite a few contract tracers for $100 billion between now and December, right? I think that's the time period it's for. Yeah,
and that's why I think it's really important that, you know, you asked why I got up there and spoke. And like, I'm watching things being laid out for my community, not just my community. I'm watching things being laid out for my state and every state and everyone in this entire country that are, like, if we don't oppose these things, if we don't stand up and tell our legislators we are not going to comply with this, and we sure as heck don't want you voting for it, then we're going to get handed a bill of goods that we're paying for, because it's our tax dollars paying for all this garbage.
Yeah, we paid for Wuhan and everything.
Yeah, and that's infringing upon our personal liberties guaranteed by our Constitution and by our Bill of Rights. And, we're guaranteed the ability to redress our government. And if we don't do that, then what are we doing? Nothing. We're sitting around being bumps on logs, watching Netflix all the time and doing nothing.
And you just gave a speech on this past Saturday, right?
I did, yeah.
So which one of these things and what approach did you take in that speech? Because I didn't get to hear it.
Yeah, so that speech, it was a little bit more formal in my address. I wasn't quite so loud and aggressive, which I was in the first speech because, partly because I'm frustrated by what I'm seeing. And also I think that people need to get off their butts and do something. So you kind of have to motivate them sometimes.
Right.
In this speech, it was a little bit more formal, meaning that I'm particularly addressing my representative officials and what's happening in my state, and citing from the Constitution and from the Declaration of Independence. That's actually the bigger piece that I cited from, about our ability to redress and why we left to form this country, and what does our founding documents say about the very people that founded this country and what they believed, and how should that impact our view on things today. And it focused on the problems of division. Like, as a society and as a people, we are American citizens, right? And we know, based on, the study of the human population, that really race is not a thing. Like, we are one race, we are one human race, and we are one American people. And we're being divided, and we're being divided by a force that is it's like a counter-revolutionary force. We're being driven to hate each other, whether it's blacks hating whites, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, and like the severe aggression towards white people or white cops or cops in general. These are divisive forces that are at work in our society that drive us away from looking at the true problems that exist, like oppression from our government officials and from people like Bill Gates. Like, Bill Gates is not an elected official, and yet he's making all of this attention and all this effect coming to us through the bills like HR 6666 because of his ability to influence different officials, whether it's at the WHO, which he's like the second largest funder of besides the United States, which, thank God, we just pulled our funding from them.
That was wonderful, but Bill Gates didn't pull his funding at this point.
Oh, no, he's going to probably increase his funding.
He'll probably take over for the U.S.,
Yeah. And so, looking at what's going on with all that stuff, like, I couldn't just sit back and relax. And granted, I'd had a lot of these thoughts for a while and frustrations for a while, watching everything, play out over the past couple of months. And my wife at the rally that we went to said, you know what, you're a really good speaker. Why don't you put something together and go up and speak? Like, you see what happens in the hospital on a daily basis. And you've told me your frustrations and concerns and about what you're seeing. So why don't you speak? And I was like, okay. So I got up off my butt, went and talked to the organizer of the event and asked him if I could speak. I told him who I was and what I did for work. And I said, you know what, I could speak at least from my experience in healthcare and, tell people what I see. Yeah,
your wife was completely right. So, a lot of people have said, well, the real death rate, which we're finding out now, if you take off, actually is extremely low because the overall death rate for the country has not changed much. It's just that nobody's dying from anything except COVID-19, amazingly.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are saying because of that, it's very, very low. You can't find out exactly because most of the death figures are fake, and the people filling out the certificates have been told to do it that way. But the mistake I'm getting at is that a lot of the so-called, conservative people that are really questioning all this are saying, well, the death rates don't justify the lockdowns, but they don't understand, in my opinion, even if the death rates were 90% in a free country that's actually serious about the Bill of Rights and the Declaration that you mentioned, you don't get to take away those rights no matter if it's 100%. It can't be done, right?
Yep. Yeah, because they're not given to us by our government. That's
no, and they weren't written like unless there's an emergency.
Yeah, Yeah, and actually, that's one of the reasons that I encourage people. At the end of my first speech, I gave a comparison of like how did, and it's an interesting comparison because it's counter-revolutionaries in our own country at the time in the 1960s, the Black Panthers, which was, you know, a lot of the people that were involved in civil rights in the 60s. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. was, you know, in many ways pegged as like a communist sympathizer, and many people were kind of pegged that way in the 60s, and the Black Panthers as well. I mean, like, the means by which they did things was very much like a Marxist dialectic view of how to subvert society. And so one of the means by which Huey Newton, who was the founder of the Black Panthers, actually worked to subvert the oppression of his own black community in California was knowing how the law worked and knowing what the law said. And when it comes to having all of these restrictions applied to us, if you actually read and understand the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and you read and understand the executive orders of your particular state, you can better address your oppression by understanding and knowing the law. And so given executive orders, there's a little difference there because an executive order isn't a formal law because it's not passed by the legislature. It's actually just a statement made by your executive that is trying to exert authority. You know, even just understanding that, you can kind of work the system. And that's kind of what I was getting at, is if in my state, you know, we're told that we have to wear masks to go into any business establishments. But if you read the executive order, it says, if you have a medical condition, you don't have to wear a mask, but it doesn't specify what those medical conditions are. It tells you that you can't be told that you have to provide any documentation about it, and you don't have to tell them what your medical condition is.
Just that you have one, right?
Yeah. So I could have warts, and that's
I mean, you don't even need the warts. Being alive is a medical condition. Right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm just throwing out an example. So it's like, I could basically justify it any way I want. Granted, a business can tell me that they don't want me to come in, and you know what I'm going to tell them? That is perfectly fine. I will no longer frequent your business anymore. Yeah. And, you know, you punish people economically.
Yeah, as long as a lot of people do that, that works.
Yeah, it does, yeah. And that's actually kind of what I'm advocating for, is like, look, just pay attention and learn how things work. Understand the laws, and actually be willing to stand up for what you think, instead of sitting down and being someone that just takes everything spoon-fed to them, and you know, you're surprised when you're dead after they fed you cyanide for, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, the Constitution, a lot of people point out, restricts the federal government and gives it power over the states in the enumerated powers only, right? The real restricted areas. What happens when the governor, you know, shows that they're totally insane, which a lot of states are doing right now? Well, New Jersey just said it was going to be shut down for 3 more months because it was so dangerous.
Who said this?
New Jersey, the governor there.
Well, my view on it, and I think this is a valid constitutional view, is that if you read the Constitution, it says that no state law shall supersede the Constitution if it violates the Constitution and if it violates the Bill of Rights. Yeah. So we have redress, and part of our ability to redress is to actually use lawsuits. So an executive order is the means by which you negate or get rid of an executive order isn't to just continue overlaying executive orders over the top of it. It's actually to attack it at its foundation source. Like, where is the authority to make these executive orders come from? And does the executive order violate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? And if we actually approach it in that way, then I'm hoping that having good judges, and that's my hope, would actually evaluate it constitutionally and say, well, if this executive order violates the rights of our citizens according to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, then the executive order is null and void. Right.
Well, like fighting the virus in Michigan involves you can't buy garden seeds anymore.
Yeah, and what the heck would that, like, why? Why does that make any sense? Yeah, well, we are going to keep you from being able to produce your own food, so you have to go to the store and you have to wear a mask and you have to be able to eat it.
If you grew your own food, you might touch it and that would contaminate it.
Whatever. Yeah. Like, it's a train of illogic, and that's one of the things I said in my second speech. It's like, this is what we're being asked to do, is to follow this train of illogic continually, even though it continues to change.
So what does that mean people should do to to avoid this reaching its conclusion? I mean, you were saying why all this illogical stuff, and it's obviously, I think what's hard for people to grasp is it's coordinated globally.
Yeah.
And this dark power has infiltrated almost all the power positions in the U.S. Almost.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're delivering piles of bricks for rioters now, and they just found out what company was doing that.
Yeah, and the question is who paid the company to do it? Because it's not just the company.
They found that out.
Yeah,
it's a company owned by Gates and somebody else.
Yeah, so I think the means by which you actually should approach that situation is still using the court system. I mean, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be ultimately because I'm not a judge, nor do I have influence over a judge directly myself. But if we can address this using the judiciary system and actually like prosecute the people that bought the loads of bricks and dumped them in the middle of a city for no reason, knowing that there were rioters coming, it's like involuntary manslaughter, you know. And then with the other things, like we still have the ability to petition our governing officials. So one of the things people don't realize, and this is something that I found out when I was in college the first time doing a poli-sci class, is one individual, me or you, sending a letter to their politician or calling their office and leaving a voicemail telling them your position on an issue, it may not make them change their mind. It may not make them make a policy decision, but for every single individual that does that, it's the equivalent of 14,000 constituent votes.
Yeah, because most of them don't take the time, but they're thinking in the same way.
So, yes, and that's what people need to realize when it comes to addressing our government or redressing our government officials is like, look, you have a problem with something? If you actually get off your butt and make a phone call, which is freaking not that difficult to do, you just dial a number and you call them and you leave a message. Yeah. You're actually making an impact that is equivalent to 14,000 people's voices. And if say half of our state, half of my state in Connecticut did that, my gosh, the political officials would get a really big picture or big picture idea about what their citizens actually wanted. And if they vote for this stuff that we don't want, that they're going to get their butts tossed out of office or we're going to storm the state house. Yeah, that's a good point. So everybody who thinks they're not important should realize they essentially represent a group of 14,000 followers. Every single person does. Yes. Yeah. Right. Yep. Right. And so that's one of the reasons when my speech that I said, sign petitions at whitehouse.gov, because granted, that's not to my local officials, but it does tell the president when this bill comes to your desk, we really don't want you to sign it. So that's one means to do it. And then the other one by using standforhealthfreedom.com is that site was set up as it's a nonprofit set up by SAYERG as a political redress. So you can go to that website. They have a email that's already formatted for you that you can add to make it personal about what you believe. And if you agree to what that email states, then you sign your name to it and you put your address and you put your zip code and your email. And that letter then gets sent to your representative for your district, to your senators in your state, to your governor in your state, and I believe to the president as well. What's the name of that site? Standforhealthfreedom.com. Dot what? .com. .com. Okay. Standforhealthfreedom.com. That's great. I didn't even know about that. Yep. And when you do that, it's that whole 14,000 constituent vote thing. You just had a really easy way to actually voice your opinion if you're opposing, the HR 666 bill, because that's what one of their petitions is about. It actually addresses that, which then covers what's going on in your state too, because if you're opposing HR 6666, you're actually opposing the state law that's the mirror for it, because all these states that are pushing this issue are already drafting laws to mimic the HR 6666 law. Okay, wow. Interesting. And so is there a list of petitions on that page that you get to? Yeah, I think there's 3 categories, and you just click on them, and it will bring you up to either the petition to the president, the petition to your particular representatives and senators and governor. And then the third one, I believe, is a means by which you can actually tell SAYERG and Stand for Health Freedom to contact you and to keep you up to date on information about all this stuff that's happening.
Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah, we need to let everybody know about it.
Yep, and if you're interested, if you're like me and you're somebody that likes to dig, and even if you don't like to dig, if you like to have somebody send you information that's up to date on things that are happening that's good for your health, that has to do with current events and what's going on in our society, if you just go to Green Med Info, that's green like the color, med, M-E-D, info.com, sign up for their email. You don't even have to, I mean, granted, if you want to get really good in-depth information, just pay for their service. I think it's like $9 a month, and you can get access to peer-reviewed articles to do your own research if you're a person that's like me. And you can do different plans. If you're like a real digger and you want to access 100 articles or infinite articles per month, you just pay a little bit more. And you can get either the free emailings, which is what I get, and it's amazing. And you can still get peer-reviewed articles that way that are sent to you, because some of them have the articles highlighted. You just click on it and you get access to it. And then if you want to actually do your own research and you're kind of an amateur at it, pay for the minimal service, which is $9. And or if you're someone that's more like a digger like me, you just pay for the full service if you really are interested in research, and you're going to get access to stuff that's going to give you a really good idea of what's up. Yeah, it's commonly accepted language when it comes from that source. Yeah. So, and what about if people want to stay in touch with what you're doing? How do they do? People can look me up on Facebook. I have, like you said, my name is Josiah Dan, Josiah, and then Dan, D-A-N. People can friend me on Facebook and kind of just keep an eye on what I'm doing, what I'm up to, what I post. Recently, I've just been so busy with everything that kind of just blew up because of the video. It's really hard to keep up. So I actually understand more about why you actually might need like a personal secretary. Yeah, exactly. That's great though. That means you're going to reach a lot of people. Well, hopefully. I mean, and for me, it's not really about me getting to people. It's about getting the truth out to people. So I don't really care, other than me being able to provide for my family, that anything changes. It's not like I'm looking to get rich off of being in social media or anything like that. I just want people to understand that there are changes coming that aren't good changes for us as a society and for our families, because our family is the foundation piece of society. It is the key, like the keystone of society. If you just start disrupting that, which is what some of these globalists call them, progressive, whatever, people that are driving for these massive changes, they're looking to actually kind of like destroy the family unit and to make us more subjugated to the state, and or thinking that the state is more like our parent than our parent is. Yeah. And when you destroy that family unit, you actually destroy society. All these things like masks help do that too, because it makes you impersonal. Yeah. And that was one of the things, one of my friends that I work with, he's a more educated than me in terms of his overall degree that he's attained, because he's a physician's assistant. But he told me one of the scariest thing for him is raising his kids in an environment where they actually are afraid of people, and not for anything other than that they might get sick. And it's like, well, this isn't really a legitimate concern, number one. Number two, it actually desensitizes people, especially from the foundation when they're children, to what it means to care for somebody else. So your ability to have compassion and empathy and knowing who someone else is, a lot of that comes through really close personal interaction. Like, kids don't get really good close friends by staying 6 feet away from each other for the entirety of their lives. Did you see those pictures of the playgrounds with squares on them? The kids go out to recess and they get to sit in the square. It's ridiculous. It's like going into the store and seeing X's on the floor that you have to stand on. I know. Lately, the banks are really into that. They're keeping people outside to wait until it's a little safer to go inside, and then don't get near anybody, and only 3 people in this huge room at a time. And yeah, I mean, I heard, and like I said, I didn't dig into this one, but I heard that like 6 feet apart is actually the optimal distance for facial recognition technology to pick up on people. So if when you start evaluating all of this peripheral pieces of information, it makes far more sense in terms of a global control network that's being created to actually manage the cattle, us being cattle.
Yeah, as you call the herd.
Yeah.
In China, it's been kind of a test run, and there are demonstrations of the facial recognition combined with the distancing that have been demonstrated on video. And it's, you know, a red rectangle around people that are less than 6 feet away from somebody. And they're getting ready. And there's also that patent 06060606. Different, I mean, 3 sixes. I'm sorry, not 4. Hard to keep them track. That involves a new financial system because, you know, money's so dangerous it could have a germ on it. And, your money is injected, the system is injected into you with the dye, and you get instructions, and if you obey the instructions, they credit your account. Yeah,
it's insanity. I mean, in reality, listening to something like that is insane. There's movies made about this stuff to just kind of pad the system and make us get used to it, but like, it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty malevolent, and so a lot of people will wonder, well, if we have to do it, we don't have any choice. And that's going to be a big question, I think.
Well, I mean, like I said, when I've given interviews before, I approach things from the Bible as kind of my main vantage point because I'm a Christian and I evaluate things through the lens of what does that tell us. And if you read Revelation, it says that there's going to be a separation of the peoples, and that if you don't have the mark of the beast, this 666 mark, that you essentially are not allowed to participate in society the way that everyone else is. You can't buy, you can't trade, you can't sell, you can't work without this mark that's on you.
And
so
still people will choose. People will choose not to have the mark anyway, right?
Yeah, and so that does tell us, like, hey, you know what? There is going to be a people that says no. I mean, it's going to suck for us probably, but we're going to say no, and we're going to deal with the consequences.
It's going to be a test of creativity to see, all right, you don't want to just lie down and die if you're not in the group. You have to figure out something to do instead.
Yeah, and I think it should drive us back to, like, you know, what did our ancestors do to survive? Number one, like, how do you farm? How do you eat things out there in nature that might, you know, that we never otherwise would have thought of because we don't have access to things in the grocery store.
Well, people have been losing basic skills for a long time.
Yeah.
Might be good to get those back.
Yeah, definitely.
So, well, I think it's inspiring, you know, that when I said that you're going to reach a lot of people, I didn't mean necessarily from any ego point of view, but just that the more people you reach, it's like that any of us reach, the more people that know about this and are not easily going to agree to aspects of the mark, the better for the future.
Yeah, and I think for us in this society that we live in here, elsewhere in the world, they don't have our U.S. Constitution. They don't have our Bill of Rights. So we have something that's of a severe advantage to us as a society right now, that if we give it up and we don't fight for it, then we are going to end up like most of these societies that are basically having everything told to them from the top down, and they have no ability to do anything otherwise, except for, you know, attempts to, I can't think of the word, just refuse to participate or to refuse to cooperate. And in which case, you know, you get tossed in jail, you get, you know, all these detrimental things happen to you. But at least here, we have the ability to not participate in stupidity, which is really what I'm thinking most of this stuff is stupidity. And we get protection because we don't participate in that stupidity, because we have a constitution and we have a Bill of Rights and we have the ability to redress our government.
Right. And I think the positive sign for anybody that's listening from outside the country that's saying, well, is it hopeless then? I think in the U.S. founding documents, in the Declaration that you referred to, it basically makes it clear that everybody has the same rights anywhere in the world. Their government may not appreciate it too much, but they do, and it's not codified into documents, but they have the rights. Their challenge is going to be, what do we do with no legal recognition of those rights? We have to figure out something.
Yeah.
This is be a good time to start figuring it out right now. Yeah,
and I mean, how did our country get founded? As much as it may have been a challenge. I'm going to move my phone because it's raining outside now.
Okay, sure.
As much as it was a challenge for us to start this country, we had to make some severe choices. I mean, our founding fathers actually fought for our freedom against the British during a pandemic. There was a smallpox epidemic in the United States. Sorry, I used the wrong term. Not a pandemic, an epidemic. So there was a smallpox outbreak in the United States that our founding fathers fought for our freedoms for during. So it's not like they didn't understand.
It wasn't even the United States at that point, right? It was just the various states that were allied with each other.
Yes. So in our colonies, there was a smallpox epidemic. And so they had, the concern that they were going to get infected, but, it didn't keep them from going out there with rifles to oppose the people that were oppressing them.
Right. And also remember, they did not have a constitution either.
Yeah. They understood that freedom comes at a price, and they are willing to pay that price. And I think that if you really love freedom and you really love not being forced to be subjected to a tyrannical authority, you need to actually count the cost.
Yeah, exactly. And they did understand something that people have lost now and have to get back, and that's that if you put yourself in a subservient position, hoping that the authorities will take care of you, you don't get good results. That kind of security. Who said that if you're giving up liberty for security, you don't get either one?
Yeah. I think it was Jefferson. I can't remember.
One of those guys.
But it was one of our founders.
Yeah, exactly. So all we have to do is live up to the original spirit and go from there.
Yeah, and that's something that's in dire need at this point in our country, is people that recognize that we have freedoms guaranteed to us, that those documents that are founding documents of our country address those freedoms, and that we have the ability to stand up. And that's what my speech was about. Stand up, get off your butt, stand up.
Powerless.
Yeah, tell them no. I mean, there's a lot of power in telling someone no.
Yeah. And if you do that, somebody else is going to see it and do the same thing.
Yep. So there's power in numbers. And so part of my speech, the first speech, was to kind of inspire people to get off their butts and think about the fact that you can tell your governing officials that you're not going to comply with this stuff. And if you do that, people are going to follow you. They're going to pay attention to what you're doing. Right. That's why when I go into a store, I don't wear a mask.
Yeah, I've been doing that too. It's very subversive.
Yes.
But yeah, the people at the checkout registers where they don't actually physically prevent you from going in, I've done that, and then I talk to the people at the registers and things like that, and they say, yeah, this is ridiculous. This is a complete hoax, and I hope we get to stop doing it pretty soon because their employers are forcing them. Yeah,
and one of the things that I said to people during the first rally that I attended was speak loud and speak often. So when you notice stupidity happening and things with this mandatory masking issues happening, and you're the person that's actually questioning it and doing something that's subversive against it, be willing to talk to people around you about it when they look at you funny, because they may look at you funny because they actually want to do the same thing.
Exactly right. And if there's a subtle aspect of that, when you do that without carrying the combative attitude in, and you say, look, we're both on the same side, and this is being done to both of us. And if you're not attacking them, then it's really hard for them to attack you back unless they're just gone. Yeah. You have to not worry about the response.
Yep.
So, well, thanks for the inspiration. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you're getting a lot of support as a result.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised at the number of people that are responding well to me, because I was actually expecting kind of the opposite after I said things that were really a challenge to the mainstream narrative and to people that I may work with.
Most of the people in the mainstream power structure either don't really understand and haven't thought about what they're doing, serving the system that they don't really understand, or they do kind of feel that they understand it and it's not right, but nobody else is questioning it, so they keep doing it. And you're helping them because they could become defectors from within the system and end up as strong allies of everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at history, not just our U.S. history, but my wife and I, through our church's small group, are reading a book about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was an amazing guy, and he had some really strong convictions in his life. And those convictions drove him to oppose the authority that was in power in Germany during his life, which was Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And, he came to some conclusions about what choices would be best that were really challenging conclusions to come to, especially for someone who was sympathetic to the pacifist movement and who was a Christian who, wanted to serve God. But he thought, if I'm going to serve God and serve him well, I'm going to serve his people. I also need to protect his people from the severity of true evil. And it drove him to form an alliance with people that had as their end goal an assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler. And you can debate the moral underpinnings of that choice, but for me, looking at the situation, I look at someone like Adolf Hitler, and if our world was subjected to an authority figure like him, we would not have anything close to what was guaranteed to us under our Declaration of Independence and Constitution and Bill of Rights. We would be living in fear constantly of a person that, tosses people in a concentration camp because they disagree with him, or because they're of a particular bloodline, or because they are artists or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a scary place to be.
Those people are in control at the moment. It's just that we don't see most of them.
Yeah.
But the whole Third Reich situation in Germany came off of the main group that's actually still in control. Yep. And they're just not in the news very much. Mm-hmm. They own the major media and things like that.
Yeah.
But
big pharma funded Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. And other eugenics groups and things like that. It's all together. One of the great radio hosts that we can't mention without disappearing suddenly said that if Adolf Hitler had been wearing a pink sweater, everybody would have been fine following him, and it might have avoided the war.
Yeah.
So now they're more sophisticated. They're your friends, and they're just going to take care of you, and they're only wanting to save you from invisible enemies and all these evil germs that are going to destroy all life immediately if you don't.
Yeah, and we should as a people be consistently listening for that phrase, like invisible enemy, or they're all terms that were actually kind of coined and laid out from books like 1984. I mean, like if you read 1984 with a critical eye, the society of 1984 had this, sort of like invisible enemy or terrorist organization called, I think it was Goldberg or Goldstein. And he was like this fictitious enemy that was created to create a panic among the people because there was this constant war against him because he was trying to destroy their society. And yet that's what we're watching with terrorism and after 9/11. That's what we're watching with this, COVID-19 and like this severe fear from viruses. To be frankly honest, we have coexisted with viruses. If you're taking a conservative view on the length of time that humanity's been on this earth, like 10,000 years. If you're taking a more liberal view, you're talking like at least 50,000 years. So we've been living with all this stuff for a long time. Why the heck would we be scared of a virus that we, may be new to us, but for 50,000 years, our people have survived, progenited, and populated an earth that now is 7.6 billion or 7.9 billion people strong.
Yeah, it survived somehow. And the number of viruses that are in symbiosis in your body is probably in the trillions.
Yes.
And even the bacteria are, 5 to 10 to 1 over human cells. And it's not like a mistake of God. It's some kind of really beautifully balanced system.
Yeah.
And the idea that you have to be safe by killing all microorganisms is a new belief that I guess it's the religion of allopathic medicine that started around 1910 in America.
And that's a good way of putting it, is like this whole religious aspect of like, who's now our God?
Well, it's true, because that's why they don't have to have like qualifications or anything, because it's religious status.
Yeah. They're just authority figures because they're of a religious ilk.
Honorary emperor and stuff like that.
Yeah. Before this whole thing happened with COVID-19, something really awesome that I was exposed to via Green Med Info was a presentation. It was an article and a presentation that was in an emailing. And the presentation was by a PhD in virology. And he was presenting at the National Institutes of Health. And I believe this was sometime around November. It was like the end of 2019 into 2020. And his research is like, it is groundbreaking research as a comparative for us as a society and as a human race to look at, because it is upending this allopathic view of viruses. Like, we have to fight off all these viruses and have to fight off all these bacteria because they're going to just kill us and we're all going to die.
The only good virus is a dead virus, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, that's why we have this whole massive campaign for vaccines, and why there's 170 more of these vaccines in the pipeline to be started to fork out to everybody in society, especially once they make it mandatory. Yeah. And it's number one, it's a money-making scheme. And number two, it's a control mechanism. And number three, it's a lie. Like, we're being lied to about the necessity for all this stuff. Our bodies have a symbiosis, like you said, with the viruses that are floating around us. And granted, there are things that can hurt us. I'm not saying that there are not, because there are pathogens. But the more you dig in and understand how the body works, when you are treating the body well, when you are eating healthy and you're exercising and you're in a better mental state and spiritual state, you actually optimize most of the functions in your body, and it actually
you get this thing called immunity, right?
Yeah. The immune system is amazing. Doesn't cost
anything.
That's right. Yeah. We don't need to create our own immunity. We just have to live.
Real health information is being violently suppressed in this country and most of the world. And if that got out, I understand why they're suppressing it. It's a good move from their point of view, because if it got out, the amount of the medical system that you would need is probably 1% of what there is now.
Yeah, it would almost in a way revert back to what medical care was like in terms of costs and necessary applications, to like the early 1900s or the late 1800s.
It'd be like if you get hit by a car, you might need to be put back together, something like that.
Yeah, well, you have emergency care, but even just like the necessity to go see a physician is kind of a fear-driven.
Well, yeah, it's like, do I have a drug deficiency? What do I need to take, to get over it? Right.
Yeah, and it drives this this view that we're constantly like sick. Like, I can't remember the term, but it's when someone that thinks that they're sick all the time. Hypochondriac. The medical system that we have almost drives people to go down that road.
And also a long time ago, doctors got to use their own wisdom and experience and perception to try to figure out what's happening and what you should do to be healthy. They can't do that anymore. They could go to jail. They have to classify as a disease, what you have, let you understand that there's no cause, and that it's just bad luck or bad genes or you're too old or whatever. And then line that up with the standard of care treatment and give you the drug. Or worse. And they're facilitators of a system now.
Yeah. Right. And it's a scary thing. I mean, I know physicians, and I know people that are really good physicians, and not everybody operates the same under that kind of mechanistic system.
They can try to ignore it.
Yeah, I know people that actually are really good with patients. And so I think, part of the thing to steer away from as well in looking at things this way is not to lump everybody together and say that everybody's bad that's in the medical field.
No, I'm not saying any of the doctors are bad. I'm saying the system is trying to make them into facilitators. It's the same way with teachers, other people like that teachers used to come into the school because the neighborhood chose them as the wisest person to teach the kids for the time being. And they used their own insight to do that. Now, I know a lot of teachers too, and most of them are still great people like the doctors, but they're told exactly what they have to teach and how and what beliefs and all that.
Yeah.
That's what
and that's a scary thing, because when it's coming to you as a government sponsored campaign, and there's a word for that. It's called propaganda.
Yeah, it's very sophisticated these days, and the cure for it though is not complex. It's really simple. It's just like in what's that story? The Emperor's New Clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell the truth.
Yep.
If he's naked, you can say that.
Yep. And there's a lot of nakedness around, huh?
A lot of naked emperors, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's leave it at that, and we'll see. You don't have any upcoming speeches that you know of right now, right?
Oh, actually, I do. I'll be delivering a speech this Saturday.
Okay.
It's on the 6th of June, I believe, is Saturday, and that is at 11 a.m. To 3 p.m. There's an event I'll be attending, and I will be speaking at with multiple other speakers called the Reopen the Region Rally. It's in Hartford at the Capitol Building in Connecticut. And the Reopen the Region Rally is actually an attempt to force all the states in our region, which are actually, most of them are all working together to kind of keep our states in a state of fear and closure, business-wise.
Right.
They're all working together with their plans to keep that to be the case. And we are trying to gather lots of people there together to strongly encourage them otherwise, and to hopefully get some media attention there and get the word out.
What are the main states that are considered to be in the region?
Yeah, so Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York are in our region, and it seems like, and it's kind of been the case, definitely Connecticut, Mass, and New York are working together with their policy choices for the, and I would call it quote unquote reopen, because it's kind of questionable about what they even really want to reopen, or if they really want to reopen.
It's going to be a new definition for sure.
Yeah, and then Rhode Island as well, because Rhode Island is under kind of a similar system. And so the campaign is actually hopefully going to draw people from all of those states, as well as, I believe, Pennsylvania, because they've been advertising there as well.
Okay. And if somebody sees that video after it's already over, they can still watch it, right? I mean,
of my speech?
Yeah, the one that's coming up.
Yeah. Yep. As long as I have somebody there doing a live feed for me, that'll be able to be recorded and watched on my Facebook page for sure.
Okay,
and then
so on Facebook, right?
Yeah, and then I know one of the other people that I interviewed with. Her name is Jay Cherry. She's a blogger she's on Facebook as well. She's done recordings of me. She's actually the one that invited me to speak there at that event. Okay, good. So she may be interviewing me again after that speech, and I would assume it's probably going to be recording most of the speeches that day. Which there's some other good speakers there too that are more well known than I am. I'm just a common guy that had his video blow up online. But there's a guy named Brandon Strock who's going to be speaking there, and the organization that he started is called Walk Away. He's going to be, at the rally. And then another gentleman, Dr. Aaron Lewis, and he is a pastor. I believe he's from Connecticut. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but I heard one of his speeches this morning, and it was really good because he's addressing a lot of the things that we actually just talked about in this interview. And he's approaching it from because he's a black minister and comes from the black community in the United States, but looking at the history of medical experimentation on his own people with the Tuskegee experiments and all of this really radical, crazy eugenicist doctrine that's been pumped out in this country. Right.
And, that's very closely related to a subject I unfortunately forgot to ask you about, but there's a big issue about the testing that they're saying is one of the conditions for reopening. What do they say? Testing. And the issue starts with the fact that apparently what they're testing for is generic coronavirus, so that they can say everybody's positive. And as far as the current mutations of the original laboratory virus, I don't think there are any tests going on for that at all, and they don't claim to know what form it's in right now, but they can test for coronavirus, and they want everybody's DNA from that frequently. And it's going to make a giant database. And what do you tell people about that? What's your impression of it?
So I can't speak 100% intelligently on this. So I've heard kind of conflicting views on that subject. Okay. Some of the early stuff that I read about was conflicting data about the results of testing in general, because you're testing for using it's an RNA test. And to do a good RNA test, you actually have to force the DNA to unstrand to basically kind of like see what the infection rate of an RNA virus is, and then extrapolate the data. So you get really conflicting results when you do that stuff.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that we're probably seeing really weird numbers come out when we're looking at patients that, test negative. Oh, you're positive. Oh, now you're negative again. And
they're full of false positives and negatives.
Yeah.
And and I think they're testing for the general coronavirus.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to really comment on that because I couldn't say really one way or the other because I'm not in a lab. I'm not in a lab actually evaluating the DNA strand, nor am I qualified to do that. So,
well, but a concern is that the contact tracers will be the ones to be doing testing and taking.
Yeah, they're not qualified either.
And decide whether they need to kidnap your children for their own benefit and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a very scary proposition, and that's why I said in my speech. Contact tracers, beware. You are not welcome in my home.
Yeah,
there's walking up to the door.
No great benefit from talking to them at this point.
Yeah. I got a sign on my door that says that there's no warning shots fired because the cost of ammo is too much. So exactly. If you're a contact tracer, read the sign and be wary. I got dogs too.
You're trying to help the economy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well, we'll look forward to the Saturday speech. I'm sure it'll be great again. And hold on here and we'll say goodbye in the break.
All right.
So there goes Josiah Dan, and I was really happy that we were able to get him on the show. And we saw him on the Forbidden Show before, and a lot of our guests actually we share with that large worldwide show that we can't mention. But I was hoping that when we saw Josiah's first speech that he had given on the steps of the government building in Hartford, I guess it was, in Connecticut. I was hoping we could get him on because I was thinking, wow, somebody inside the system that is brave enough to like talk normally and tell the truth and question everything that's happening. I think if we had that spirit spreading, we wouldn't have to go through the ultimate damage that this whole experience is trying to cause, that is meant to cause. And we don't have to do that if we don't want to. We have to realize we have a lot more power to decide our own future than our rulers want us to believe. And that's mainly why I wanted to share Josiah's conversation with you, just to get reminded that we don't have to feel powerless. And he's demonstrating you don't, even though it's a risk to his position that he depends on to do that. So far has been okay. And it's inspired people all over the world, I think. So, and what he was plugging as far as Sayergy's site, greenmedinfo.com, and the new site that Sayergy has, standforhealth.com, I wrote it down. That's really good to be aware of. And I didn't even know about standforhealth.com, but I'll take a look at that. It reminds me a little bit of what Dr. Labo and Ralph Fusatola and in the past General Burt Stubblebine did, turning back the fake pandemic with swine flu in 2009. And maybe they've got the software to be doing that with generating the letters very quickly and easily for your representative. So I hope they do. If you go to standforhealth.com, you can find out. And Josiah's main site, his Facebook page, I guess, where Josiah Dan, Josiah, last name Dan, and his videos should be there. I haven't seen his speech from the last Saturday, and hopefully it should be there too, so we can take a look at that. And he's by the time you see this, the reopen the region rally that he's talking about should also be on the site as a video archive. So I'm looking forward to that too. I think that's about it. That's our Sunday show for tonight. And then remember the Saturday shows. We have our Lost Arts Radio live at 4:30 Pacific and 7:30 Eastern, subject to relating to all this stuff going on in current events and world developments. And it's short. It's only an hour and it goes really fast. But usually it's me bringing up things I want to share with you about world events. But sometimes we have guests on there with us too. We've had Richard Mack and Dr. Labo and Ralph Fusatola recently. And other people will be coming up on that live show too, but it's very fast moving and free for the public. You're invited to come and be there for that one if you want to on Saturday afternoons. And you can, of course, if you miss it live with the live chat and everything, you can go and see the recording of it, which all those are posted on many video platforms. And you can stay up with that by going to lostartsradio.com. Sign up for our mailing list there, which we'll use if we can't reach you through the normal platforms at some point. Or you can see the mailing list, sign up on the main site of lostartsradio.com, or you can just email us at info@lostartsradio.com with a name and the email address that you would like us to use in the future if we need to get information to you. And that's a good thing to be signed up on. Also, probably a good idea to go to brighteon.com, brighteon.com/channel/lostartsradio and subscribe to our channel there, which that address will take you right to it. They won't be censoring, and it's a really good one to support by using it. Just watch videos there. It's all free, and that'll help, the advertisers and the general revenue for the site just by watching videos on brighteon.com. And you can post there too. It's a great site to support. Well, speaking of support, if you want to support our ability to stay on the air, since we're not doing commercials, go to lostartsradio.com to the donate button. And if you can afford to help us keep going there, that's really appreciated. Same thing on our nonprofit site, which is lostartsresearchinstitute.org, has a donate button and a lot of other interesting information on that site, as well as our Subscribe Star channel, subscribestar.com/lostartsradio. And that has all kinds of different levels that you can help us at if you want to. Planetary Healing Club is the private group that we use to be on a platform where we can just be mutually supportive in using all this information. It's especially the forbidden health information that has been around for thousands of years, and it's adapted now to current environments, and you're not supposed to know about it. But you don't always have to be sick and have all these diseases like we do now. That's highly abnormal. And to learn more about the information that shows the alternative and exactly how to use it yourself, that's at planetaryhealingclub.com. If you want to put the work in there to transform your life quality, we'll give you the information to use to do that. planetaryhealingclub.com. Any questions about it, just email me anytime. Richard@lostartsradio.com. And I read all of those and I'll answer as quickly as I can. So far, I'm keeping up with them. I think that's about it. So really glad that you got to meet Josiah Dan in our show and hopefully on his other videos. I hope everything goes really well for you. Take care of yourself. In spite of the misinformation that we're all swimming in right now and all the restrictions that are unconstitutional and illegal that we're being put under, if enough of us wake up, those are going to go away and everything can turn around. Still, it's not too late. So learn how to take care of yourself and then do it. And you'll be helping everybody else by that action. Thanks for the time, for sharing it with us. And we look forward to seeing you next time right here on Lost Arts Radio. Talk to you soon.